Novelistic elements are widely used in Jerome's life of monks. This is most evident in the life of Malchus, the captive monk, which is sometimes considered the most novelistic out of Jerome's hagiographic texts. It doesn't lack almost any of the usual ingredients of this genre. Life of Malchus recalls ancient novel not only in its theme, but also in its way of narration, which is quite unusual for hagiographic text. Indeed, as only one of Jerome's lives, Malchus' story is not told by an omniscient narrator in the third person, but by the hero in the first person. Moreover, his narrative is embedded in another narrative, which is also given by a first-person narrator who identifies himself with the author himself. In it, the narrator retells his encounter with the old Malchus and how he heard his story. This is a frame narrative which functions only to introduce a secondary narrator and to set the stage for his performance. The use of this narrative technique has also the precedent in ancient novel, appearing, for example, in Achilles' Statius, Leucippe, and Clitophon. Here, the narrative proper is also voiced by Clitophon himself and embedded in a wider story about the encounter between the author and the hero. In my paper, I would like to show that Jerome uses genre convention of the ancient novel entirely programmatically to promote the idea of Christian asceticism. First, he adapts the novelistic motif of chastity and premarital celibacy and transforms it into the idea of celibate marriage. Furthermore, through the contradiction between the frame narrative and the narrative embedded, he points to the problematic nature of a relationship which strongly resembles the ascetic practice of syneartism. His advocacy of this practice is also a response to criticism of his own relationship with the widow Paula, which raised suspicion in church circles and was the cause of Jerome's departure from Rome. At the end of the life of Malchus, the main narrator of narrative frame presents the story told by old Malchus, calling it a story of chastity, Historia castitatis. He says the lesson is that amid swords, amid wild beasts and desert regions, chastity can never be taken captive. Pudicitia nunquam esse captiva. In reality, however, the greatest threat to the hero's chastity is not swords, desert, not wild animals, but marriage. It is precisely the fear of the marriage his parents are forcing him into, which drives Malchus into the community of monks in the desert Chalcis. As well, it is an involuntary marriage with his fellow slave, which puts his much cherished chastity at risk again. Malchus' Historia castitatis is thus primarily a story in which chastity cannot fall into captivity, even within a married state. The emphasis on chastity and sexual abstinence, which characterizes the heroes of Jerome's life of Malchus, is not alien to ancient novel, and in most preserved texts, this particular quality is one of the key features of the novel's heroes. The main couple's commitment to chastity is constantly tested, and despite all the pitfalls and adversities, the heroes can maintain loyalty to each other, often in entirely unlikely circumstances. In the final reunion, the they remain as chaste as they were at the beginning. And in some cases, they not only maintain loyalty to each other, but voluntarily postpone sexual intercourse until they are married. This premarital celibacy can be found in Aethiopica by Heliodorus of Emesa, whose heroes, Theology and Charybdis, swear to each other that they will avoid sexual congress until their wedding night. And despite all the pitfalls of fate, they keep that promise. Castitas is therefore one of the basic qualities of heroes of the ancient world and is a prerequisite for a final legitimate marriage, which normally ends the adventurous story. This novel convention is also adopted by Jerome in his Historia castitatis, but the Christian author adapts it to promote the ideal of ascetic life. For his heroes, chastity is also a fundamental value of life, not as a precondition for future marriage, as in the ancient world, but as an alternative to it. The heroes of Jerome's hagiographic text do not maintain virginity in order to marry, but maintain it despite the marriage which they are forced to enter into. Thus, while in the ancient world the central loving couple is divided by fate and each of them experiences different adventures on their own before finally reuniting to live together. In Jerome's Life of Malchus, they broke up at the end again and lived separately. In the ancient novel, marriage is the ultimate happy ending, which concludes the adventurous wandering and separation of the protagonists, while in Jerome's text, marriage is the lure of the devil, invidia diaboli, and the ultimate happy end is separation of the involuntary spouses and the departure of each to their chosen monastic community. In the first case, separation and adventures are the hero's chastity test and preparation for a legitimate marriage. In the second case, the marriage itself is the adventure and the test of the hero's chastity and ascetic determination. The novel idea of premarital celibacy thus turns into the idea of celibate marriage in Jerome's interpretation. Malchus's coexistence with his involuntary wife begins in truly dramatic circumstances. When the Syrian monk is forced against his will by an Arabian owner to take a Christian fellow prisoner to his derelict cave, he sees suicide as the only way out. The moment he turns his sword against himself, however, unexpectedly his unwanted mate intervene and suggest to Malchus that they will only pretend to live together. They will appear to have a normal marital life, but in reality they will live like a brother and sister, avoiding any physical contact. They then live together in this involuntary marital union without him ever seeing or touching his wife's naked body. Malchus' spouse calls this kind of cohabitation, which is not based on corporeal connection, copula corporis, but on a spiritual bond, copula anima, a marriage of chastity, conjugium pudicitia. That means a marital union in which both partners voluntarily renounce any physical contact and undertake to live in chastity and renunciation. This conjugium pudicitia strikingly resembles the Christian practice of synezactism. This is the voluntary coexistence of male and female ascetics in one household on only a spiritual basis. Such a couple gave each other support in their ascetic efforts while living in conditions of strict sexual abstinence. Thus, they tried to deny the corporeality of the opposite sex and showed that ascetic self-esteem can completely eliminate sexual desire. Sharing one household and often one bed together put their ascetic devotion on a daily test and showed how strong their will was to keep their vow of celibacy. Girls living in such a relationship were called in Greek gynaikes sine actor, in Latin virgines sub introducta. Of course, this way of cohabitation raised suspicion in church circles. Jerome also criticized the practice of synesactism in some of his letters. In the famous letter 22 to Eustochium, he warns against pestis agapetarum, as he mockingly called practitioners of synesactism, calling it a new kind of prostitution, novum concubinarum genus. According to him, these would-be adepts of ascetic life only pretend to live with a male partner seeking spiritual solace, spirituale solatium, but in reality they only care about physical communion, carnale commercium. Despite his criticism, however, the very idea of connubium pudicitia is extremely tempting for Jerome, although in practical life it encounters a number of almost unsurmountable obstacles. The state of a kind of sexual indifference, when one becomes completely free from their bodily needs, is, according to him, the hay of the ascetic endeavor, and the relationship between a man and woman, free from the burden of corporeality and founded purely on a spiritual basis, was an ideal test for the success of such efforts. This tension between belief in the desexualization of human nature on the one hand and the persistent fear of the power of sexuality on the other hand is also reflected in Jerome's life of Malchus. The Syrian monk and his female partners spent some time in their spiritual marriage without breaking their celibacy, but after a while Malchus begins to miss the monastic community he left and decides to escape with his wife. An adventurous wandering through the desert ensues, in which they are persecuted by the Arabian master, who is determined to punish them with death. In the end, they both happily reach the nearest Roman military garrison, and the whole story ends with the rescue of both involuntary spouses. But when they find themselves back in the civilized world, the path of Malchus and his companion diverge. He decides to return among the monks in the Chalkis desert, entrusting his partner to an unspecified community of Christian virgins. Although he said he loved her as his own sister, he was not sure he would still be able to treat her as a sister. Thus, an experiment with spiritual marriage would end in ruin. There is no more room for such a form of coexistence in the real world. Connubium pudicitia will therefore prove to be a temporary solution, because physical temptation is too strong, and one can never be sure that they will keep their ascetic resolutions. This conclusion seems to confirm the objections of critics of synesactism, who claim that it is safer to separate male and female ascetics behind the walls of the monastery and not expose them to the risk of failure. The life of Malchus thus seems to be a novel parable about the possibility or impossibility of the spiritual coexistence of a man and woman completely free of physical contact. The author of this text makes use of the established conventions of the genre of novel, in which the chastity motive plays an important role as a prerequisite for the final marriage. It closes the adventurous wandering of main couple and ends their separation, which was a test of their mutual loyalty. The Christian author modifies this convention to promote the ideal of virginity and programmatically counts on its potential reader to perceive its version against the backdrop of the pagan genre. Marriage is no longer the ultimate happy end, but rather a test of chastity which the heroes must pass to prove their loyalty to their ascetic beliefs. Novelistic staging serves to test the idea of the possibility of spiritual relationship between a man and a woman who voluntarily choose celibacy but are tied together and forced to live under one roof. It shows that even in such circumstances it is possible to live up to one's convictions, but once such circumstances have passed, it is safer to live apart and not to expose yourself to unnecessary temptation. Although the chastity of a man committed to Christ can never fall into captivity, it is always better to avoid this captivity and not tempt the devil with frivolity. This conclusion, which is in line with official church policy, is however troubled by glaring contradiction between the frame narrative introducing the story of the strange old Syrian man and the Historia castitatis itself. When the narrator of the frame narrative mentions a strange Syrian old man, he adds that an old woman is living with him under the same roof. The question then arises as to who Malchus's roommate is and whether she is the spiritual wife with whom he allegedly broke up after his return from captivity. However, this idiomatic problem, as the contradiction between the authors and the Malchus's narrations calls the American researcher Jiří, remains unexplained, and the reader must seek the answer himself. Was the final separation of the two spiritual spouses and departure to their respective monastic community only a temporary solution? In the end, is spiritual coexistence of a man and woman possible after sexual temptation fades with age? This ambiguity is made possible by a specific narrative technique taken from novel literature. To some extent, it challenges the message of the whole Historia castitatis and leaves the reader in doubt. In addition, according to some researchers, Jerome's life of Malchus is not only a general parable of the spiritual relationship between man and woman, but also an autobiographical parable of Jerome's relationship with Paula. They too lived in Rome in a special spiritual relationship which caused scandal and fled the spreading rumors to Palestine, where they founded a male and female monastery. And thanks to their advanced age, they had the opportunity to live in shared harmony without fear of being suspected of a cover-up for carnal lust. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.